Donald Trump has sparked outrage across Britain and among NATO veterans after claiming Allied troops stayed away from the front line in Afghanistan. In an interview with Fox News, the U.S. president said NATO forces stayed a little back, a little off the front lines, as he questioned whether the alliance would ever support the United States in return.
I think, but I've always said, will they be there if we ever needed them? And that's really the ultimate test, and I'm not sure of that. I know that we would have been there, or we would be there, but will they be there? And let's hope that that never happens. We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. You know, they'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that, and they did. They stayed a little back, a little off the front lines, but we've been very good to Europe and to many other countries. And, you know, now under my administration, that began because we had a very successful first term. That began then, but it has to be a two-way street.
Fierce condemnation from British lawmakers, former soldiers, and veterans who say the claim distorts history and dishonors the dead. Over the 20-year war in Afghanistan, 3,486 NATO troops were killed, among them 457 British service personnel. Canada lost 165 people, including civilians. Denmark, now in a diplomatic standoff with Washington over Greenland, suffered 44 combat deaths, the highest per capita toll outside the United States. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's spokesperson said Trump was wrong to diminish the role of NATO forces, stressing that British troops fought and died alongside American soldiers following the September 11th attacks. Lawmakers from across the political spectrum echoed that condemnation. Labour MP and former RAF officer Calvin Bailey, who served in Afghanistan, said Trump's comments bear no resemblance to the reality experienced by those on the ground. Conservative MP Ben Obese-Jekti, a former Army captain, said it was sad to see the sacrifices of Britain and its NATO partners dismissed so cheaply. The chair of the Commons Defense Committee called the remarks appalling, while the Foreign Affairs Committee said they were more than a mistake, an insult to the families of the fallen. Veterans were even more direct. Former soldier and author Stephen Stewart described Trump's comments as offensive and inaccurate, calling it deeply ironic that a president who avoided military service during the Vietnam War would question the courage of those who served. Trump was diagnosed with bone spurs during the Vietnam era, a medical claim that has long been disputed, and received multiple draft deferments. Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey said Trump avoided military service 5 times, adding, "How dare he question their sacrifice?" The Foreign Affairs Committee chair, Emily Thornberry, described the comments as so much more than a mistake and an insult to the families of those who had died. The backlash also highlights a deeper truth about the war in Afghanistan. The United States remains the only NATO country to have ever invoked Article 5, the alliance's collective defense clause, after the attacks of September 11, 2001. NATO answered that call, and thousands of Allied soldiers never came home. As criticism mounts, the controversy has reopened painful memories and raised fresh questions about how history, sacrifice, and alliance are being framed by the world's most powerful leaders. For many veterans and families, the message is simple. They were not standing back. They were on the front line, and they paid the price.
This is a short story about war. It's a story about what war looks like from the ground. It isn't so much my story, but I was there, and I was part of it. It's the story of Operation Herrick 11, and more specifically, it's the story of Three Rifles Battle Group in Sangin, a small Afghan town of just a few square kilometres. Between October and March over the winter of 2009, the casualties sustained by Three Rifles Battle Group remain the heaviest casualties sustained by a British Army battle group since the Korean War. Sangin is where a third of all British soldiers who died in Afghanistan lost their lives. Staff Sergeant Olaf Oz-Schmidt, George Cross, 30, was killed defusing multiple IEDs on the 31st of October. Sergeant Philip Scott, 30, was killed by an IED during a patrol on the 5th of November. Rifleman Philip Allen, 20, was killed by an IED during a patrol on the 7th of November. Rifleman Samuel Bassett, 20, died in hospital from his injuries from an IED on the 8th of November. Rifleman Andrew Fenterman, 29, was killed by small arms fire during a foot patrol on the morning of the 15th of November. Rifleman James Brown, 18, died of his injuries from a suicide IED on the 15th of December. Lance Corporal David Kirkness, 24, was also killed by the suicide IED on the 15th of December. Lance Corporal Michael Pritchard, 22, was shot and killed by friendly fire from a British sniper on the 20th of December. Lance Corporal Tommy Brown was killed by an IED on the 22nd of December. Lance Corporal Christopher Roney, 23, died of his wounds from a friendly fire Apache helicopter attack on the 22nd of December. Sapper David Watson, 23, was caught in an IED detonation and died in the operating theatre on New Year's Eve. Corporal Lee Brownson, Conspicuous Gallantry Cross, 30, was killed by an IED on the 15th of January. Rifleman Luke Farmer, 19, was killed by the same IED as Corporal Brownson on the 15th of January. Rifleman Peter Aldridge, 19, was caught by an IED. He died en route to Camp Bastion on the 22nd of January. Lance Corporal Daniel Cooper, 21, was killed by an IED on the 24th of January. Corporal John Moore, 22, and Private Sean MacDonald, 26, were both killed by an IED on the 7th of February. Rifleman Mark Marshall, 29, was killed by an IED during a routine foot patrol on Valentine's Day, the 14th of February. Rifleman Martin Kingett, 19, was shot and killed on the 25th of February. Rifleman Carlo Apollis, 28, was killed by a single gunshot wound on the 1st of March. Corporal Richard Green, 23, was killed by a single sniper round on the 2nd of March. Rifleman Jonathan Allett, 19, was killed by a command wire IED on the 5th of March. Corporal Stephen Thompson, 31, was killed by an IED during a patrol on the 7th of March. Lance Corporal Tom Keogh, 24, died of a single gunshot wound on the 7th of March. Sergeant Stevie Campbell, 30, was killed by a command wire IED hidden underwater on the 22nd of March. Rifleman Daniel Holcomb, 19, was killed by a vehicle-borne suicide IED weeks short of the end of his tour on the 27th of March. 30 soldiers died in Sangin in those 6 months. Another 80 plus suffered combat injuries, including amputations. I apologise for those. There are those who I've missed. There is no definitive list that you can check to read their stories, but I pay tribute to those who made the ultimate sacrifice, some of whom I knew, many of whom I didn't. We ask young men and women, some of them still teenagers, to close with and kill the enemy through dismounted close combat to win the fight in those last 100 yards. And that ask comes with a cost. So in this period of remembrance, I ask those in this house to remember their names. And should any of us have to make that fateful decision to commit soldiers to harm's way, to remember, above everything else, that that decision will come with more names.